Morbid facts about the cast of Stranger Things. Baker Montgomery has been open about being raised by what he described as an abusive father. He said he grew up terrified 24/7, was routinely screamed at, and had his self-esteem destroyed before he was even a teenager. By 18, he was struggling with severe depression and body image issues, and he said he still deals with trauma responses from that period of his life. Matthew Modine has said he watched a man die in front of him as a boy, a cyclist who was fatally struck by a car just feet from him. He remembers seeing the man thrown into the air and lying lifeless in the road, and has said it haunted him for many years. Shannon Purser, aka Barb, has spoken about being hospitalized for OCD so severe she was terrified to leave her own home. She described waking up with daily panic attacks, fear of contamination, and self-harm intrusive thoughts until she finally received treatment. Eduardo Franco has openly talked about growing up in a dangerous neighborhood in Yuma, Arizona, where he and his family lived under constant threat from local gangs. In interviews, he said his house was shot at multiple times in drive-by shootings, to the point where his family eventually relocated because the violence became impossible to live around. Why didn't they bring him back? Why didn't they bring him back? This 2022 photo shows 40-year-old Russian mother Anna Uskova moments before she jumped into a frozen river. She was apparently following a Christian Orthodox tradition of Epiphany and believed that jumping into the frigid water would rid her of sin. However, she jumped in at a bad angle and was quickly swept away by the powerful current, trapping her under the ice. Her husband immediately jumped in to rescue her while their children screamed in horror, but his efforts were unsuccessful and her body was recovered 10 days later. This was the truck belonging to Missouri town bully Ken McElroy after he was killed in broad daylight by an angry mob in 1981. Over the course of his life, McElroy was accused of dozens of felonies, including assault, child molestation, burglary, animal cruelty, arson, and statutory rape. He always managed to escape serving time until eventually being convicted of attempted murder. But McElroy appealed and was released on bond before he immediately threatened to kill several people. An angry mob then showed up at the bar he was drinking at and shot him several times in his truck while he was attempting to leave. Despite over 40 different witnesses, nobody admitted to seeing the murder take place, and no one has been charged to this day. The Scold's Bridle was a device that was used to publicly humiliate women until the 19th century. On the inside, the device had a metal plate that would press down on the tongue and prevent the wearer from speaking. It was placed on women who were said to be troublesome to keep them quiet and prevent them from gossiping. This is a powerful photo of a starving Ugandan boy holding the hand of a missionary in 1980. For many years, the lead singer of Lynyrd Skynyrd told his bandmates that he wouldn't live to the age of 30. His dad reported that even when he was a child, Ronnie would often say, "Daddy, I'll never be 30 years old." When his father asked why he kept saying this, Ronnie would just reply, "Daddy, that's my limit." Sure enough, when he was 29 years old, Ronnie Van Zant died in a plane crash. Jeff Garcia, best known for being the voice of Sheen in Jimmy Neutron, died on December 10, 2025 at age 50 after a terrible chain of medical emergencies that began months earlier. He first suffered a brain aneurysm that caused him to collapse and hit his head, then later endured a stroke that left his health severely weakened. After a bout of pneumonia and repeated hospital visits for trouble breathing, Jeff's condition crashed when one of his lungs suddenly collapsed, forcing doctors to place him on life support. His family ultimately made the decision to pull the plug, ending a rapid decline that left fans stunned. That same day, veteran voice actor Jim Ward, who played Doug Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome, and dozens of other roles, died at 66 after years of complications with advanced Alzheimer's disease. Ward had already retired from voice work several years earlier as the disease progressed, losing his ability to continue performing before eventually requiring long-term care. According to his wife, the disease steadily deteriorated his health until his death on December 11, 2025. Together, their deaths marked the losses of two of the most iconic voices of Nickelodeon cartoons. On December 10, 2021, a violent tornado tore through the Rackley family's home near Caruthersville, Missouri. 9-year-old Anistine and her sisters huddled with their mother in a windowless bathroom, where their mom snapped a final photo to reassure relatives that they were all in their safe space. But moments later, the twister ripped the house apart and hurled the family into a nearby field. While Anistine's parents and sisters survived with injuries, the 9-year-old girl was tragically killed. In 1999, Texas man Herschel Rawls went into surgery to have his cancerous bladder removed, but he woke up to an absolute nightmare. Without warning, doctors had also amputated his beef bayonet, claiming that the cancer had spread and that the drastic step was necessary to save his life. But weeks later, pathology tests revealed that the penile tissue they had cut away wasn't cancerous at all. After years of anguish, Rawls sued and in 2003 reached a quiet out-of-court settlement, but was left with the grim reminder of how a single surgical decision can leave a patient permanently mutilated. Actor and comedian Chris Farley was originally casted to be the voice of Shrek, but he died of a drug overdose in 1997 when 90% of his lines were recorded for the movie. In 19th century Great Britain, it was illegal to attempt suicide. If the person was caught, the crime was punishable by hanging. You are 14% more likely to die on your birthday than any other day of the year. Despite its popularity, Botox is the deadliest known substance on the planet. Just 1 gram of Botox is toxic enough to kill more than 5 million grown adults. While filming the 1972 film Napoleon and Samantha, 9-year-old Jodie Foster was mauled by a substitute lion on set. The big cat picked Foster up, shook her around like a rag doll, and only released her when its trainer yelled, "Drop it." Foster later said she was in shock and thought it was an earthquake as she watched the rest of the crew run away. The same lion had nearly mauled Bob Denver while filming an episode of Gilligan's Island years earlier, and shouldn't have been anywhere near a film studio afterwards. Foster still has scars on her stomach and back from the incident and has suffered from severe ailurophobia ever since. Almost immediately after being liberated from concentration camps, an estimated 14,500 Holocaust survivors died from refeeding syndrome, since their bodies couldn't process normal food after such prolonged starvation. During the back surgery of a Hawaiian man in 2006, the surgeon couldn't find the 2 titanium rods that were supposed to be implanted into the man's spine, so he decided to improvise by implanting the shaft of a screwdriver instead. The screwdriver eventually snapped, and the man died 2 years later following 3 more corrective back surgeries. The patient's family was eventually awarded $5.6 million in a malpractice lawsuit. A shocking medical scandal is unfolding in Austria, where a neurosurgeon is facing criminal charges for allegedly letting her 12-year-old daughter drill a hole into a patient's skull during emergency brain surgery. The unconscious patient had suffered traumatic head injuries and needed a burr hole to relieve pressure, yet prosecutors say the surgeon handed the drill to her daughter and let her perform the procedure herself, despite the child having zero medical training. The girl never should have been inside the operating room in the first place, as strict hospital protocol forbids minors or unauthorized personnel from being present during sterile surgeries, let alone touching the equipment, let alone drilling into patients' skulls. The patient was never informed a child would be involved, and only discovered the truth months later after an anonymous tip led to an investigation. The hospital immediately fired the surgeons involved, and the lead doctor is now on trial for causing bodily harm and abusing her position. Although the patient survived, he reportedly still suffers long-term effects, and the court called the doctor's decision a catastrophic breach of trust and professionalism. Talented artist Norman Lee worked for Marvel Comics for nearly 20 years until he suddenly disappeared in 2015. He was snorkeling in the Cayman Islands with his wife, but never returned ashore, and his body was never found. In 1996, 16-year-old Jonathan Capewell died as a result of his obsession to smell good. The teenager covered his entire body in cologne at least twice per day until he eventually died from a heart attack. At the time of his death, Capewell had 10 times the lethal dosage of butane in his blood after the gas built up in his body for several months. In 1974, a group of 6 men entered the Hi-Fi audio store in Utah and held everyone inside hostage. The hostages were then subjected to brutal torture, including being forced to drink drain cleaner, which left them with horrible burns in their throats and mouths. One of the victims had a ballpoint pen inserted into his ear that was stomped on until it punctured his eardrum and came out his throat. All 5 hostages were later shot in the head, 3 of whom died. 2 of the perpetrators were sentenced to death, while the 3 other men involved were never caught. In 2022, 39-year-old Stephen Dierkes was working at Caterpillar's foundry in Illinois when he suddenly slipped and fell into a large vat of molten iron heated to 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. The human body has zero chance at that temperature as he was vaporized instantly. A coworker said part of his body was still on the platform while the rest of it melted like candle wax. OSHA later found several severe safety violations, but nothing could undo one of the most horrific workplace deaths in history. Kazuko Fukuda, dubbed the Woman of 7 faces, strangled a coworker in 1982, and disappeared, launching one of Japan's longest manhunts in history. But instead of hiding, she reinvented herself over and over, using fake identities, constant moves, and even plastic surgery to change her face. She stayed free for nearly 15 years, long enough that Japan's statute of limitations on murder was about to expire. But just months before time ran out, a diner owner recognized her from a TV show, and police confirmed her identity using fingerprints on a beer bottle. She was finally sentenced to life in 1999, but died in prison just 6 years later. Decades of intense drumming took a brutal toll on Phil Collins' body, causing such severe nerve damage that he can no longer hold onto drumsticks. After spinal surgery in 2009, Collins lost much of the feeling in his hands and was forced to give up drumming entirely. The loss devastated him to the point where he contemplated taking his own life. In 1974, Stanford student Arliss Perry was found murdered in a campus chapel, posed kneeling at the altar with a candle stuck inside her body in what appeared to be a ritualistic killing. The case went cold for decades until in 2018, DNA linked it to a campus security guard who took his own life as police attempted to arrest him. In 2021, during a wedding ceremony in Uttar Pradesh, India, a bride named Sarabi collapsed from a heart attack and was pronounced dead shortly afterwards. But instead of canceling the expensive event, both families agreed to continue the wedding by marrying the groom to Sarabi's younger sister, Nisha. The ceremony went on while Sarabi's body was placed in another room in the house. The incident shocked many and was confirmed by local news and relatives, who watched in total disbelief as a wedding and funeral unfolded under the same roof. In 1963, Rodney Fox was spearfishing off the coast of Australia when something suddenly pulled him under. Within seconds, Fox was suffering from a punctured lung, ripped diaphragm, pierced scapula, and an exposed rib cage, abdomen, and spleen. After pulling him up from the water, rescuers had to keep his wetsuit on to prevent his organs from spilling out. After 4 hours of surgery and 462 stitches, Rodney Fox lived to tell the tale of surviving one of the worst great white shark attacks in recorded history. During a low-speed car crash in Georgia, what should have been a routine airbag deployment turned into a life-altering injury for Hannah Oliver. The collision occurred at roughly 25 miles per hour, but when the airbag deployed, it shattered the designer glasses she was wearing, driving fragments into her eye. Doctors later determined the damage was irreversible, and Hannah went blind in that eye. But in the aftermath, she channeled the trauma into action, later launching a shatter-resistant sunglasses brand to prevent the same injury from happening to others. A young Arkansas couple pleaded guilty after attempting to sell their 2-month-old baby at a campground for $1,000 and a 6-pack of beer. The deal was written out in a handwritten contract and witnessed by others, one of whom alerted police. Authorities recovered the infant and charged the parents with child endangerment and attempting to accept compensation for adoption. The father was sentenced to prison time while the mother received probation, and both were permanently barred from contact with the child, who was placed in protective care.